Hey, it's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Today our friend Akira says, "Hey Ramsey, I'm wondering how much coaching has helped you with your martial arts skills or understanding of them. Also, if you already answered this question, my bad." Have I answered this question? Not directly, I don't think. So let's do it. Let's answer your question, my friend. The short answer is yes, a lot. Coaching has helped my martial arts skills a lot, like a whole lot. And the long answer, it's helped my martial arts skills a lot. Let's break that down. When you make an honest effort to facilitate the process of winning fights, right? When you put a vested interest in seeing your students succeed in fights, and real fights, with real people who are fighting back, where it is 100% objective. They win or they lose. They get hurt or they don't. You have to be so incredibly honest and sincere with yourself and with them about that process. There is no room for make-believe. There is no room for guesswork. There's no room for fantasy. I think when I was a younger man, I didn't think I was doing this, but I allowed myself to be driven by those things, by guesswork and fantasy and dishonesty when it came to martial arts training. I think a lot of people do that, and they may not even realize it. So what does that mean? That often happens when people want to see their style in a fight. And so they put themselves and others at risk for the sake of the success of the style. For example, many years ago, I did Taekwondo. I did a lot of Taekwondo. I loved Taekwondo. And when I started competing in other combat sports, it was quite difficult, because other combat sports are way different than Taekwondo. But I felt it was important to represent the style, to see Taekwondo succeed in other combat sports. Taekwondo in kickboxing, Taekwondo in Muay Thai, Taekwondo in MMA. I felt like that sunk cost fallacy was just taking over. I had invested so much time, so much effort, so many resources into developing these Taekwondo skills. I felt like if I don't represent the style, it will all be for naught. Which is a silly, silly thing to think. But it's the sunk cost fallacy, man. So I ended up getting hurt in ways that were unnecessary. I ended up holding back my own personal development, which was completely unnecessary, for the sake of wanting to see the style succeed, instead of being honest about wanting to succeed myself, instead of wanting to see Ramsey Dewey succeed. And that held me back for a long time, until I was able to cut the apron strings from the style, if you will. And I'm not saying not use the techniques, because, Taekwondo techniques are great. Roundhouse kicks are awesome. Front kicks are imperative for stand-up fights. Turning back kicks, side kicks, all this stuff, those are great moves. The footwork, the technique of Taekwondo can teach you a great deal about fighting, and most fighters would do well to incorporate some of that stuff into their game. But when you make it about trying to see the style, right? You see where I'm going here. Now back to your question. How has coaching made me a better martial artist, a better fighter, etc.? All right. So fast forward a number of years to the point where I'm coaching some fighters, some cage fighters who want to win MMA fights. Now, I realize if I try to teach them to be carbon copies of me, if I try to teach them, the most important thing here is not your success, it is seeing the style succeed. Then we're going to hamper their success. We're going to hold them back. That's not good for them. It's not good for me. It's not good for anyone. Remember, the style, the system is not a person. It's an imaginary entity. And at the end of the day, the style doesn't care about you. So why are we talking so much about styles? When you teach a technique, you start to see the holes in the technique. There was a technique I taught yesterday. I was teaching a couple of takedowns based on a deep underhook. So you're standing up, right, in a stand-up fight, and you manage to pummel for a deep underhook, get it around the waist like a seatbelt type of control. You can use that for hip throws. You can use that for all kinds of things. You can slide it down, grab a single leg, or go from a single leg, slide it up to the waist, and get that deep underhook to set up your hip throws, etc. And one throw in particular, some of the students were asking about, they'd seen this in different scenarios, like Sanda fighters do it sometimes. Anderson Silva taught this technique in one of his books. I don't think I've ever seen him do it in a fight, but it's the one where you have one leg behind the guy, you grab both legs, pick them up, and dump them on his back. And it's a good move, but one thing you'll notice right away if you try to teach this against somebody who is trying to fight back is that if you just put your hands and feet in the right place, he's going to move and you won't catch him. Specifically because you'll be missing the context. And the context is, this is a plan B to a single leg, to a high single. So I've got a single leg, right? He's up on one leg. Now I can switch hands, reach around there, boom, and dump him on his back. He won't be able to move. But if I try to teach this technique independently, as it often is, suddenly it doesn't work when the other guy fights back. Context is for everything, and that's one thing that coaching can allow you to learn is context. Context is for kings, my friends. You've probably been to many martial arts classes where you were taught techniques out of context. Techniques that are perfectly viable. Techniques that totally work in the right context, with the right setup. But you were not taught the right setup or the right context. You were simply taught where to put your hands and your feet if you are at this ideal point in time, at this perfect little snapshot in the space-time continuum. There, and only there, will it function. So how much about martial arts have I learned from coaching? Man, I had a student, a guy named Paul. Paul, shout out to Paul in Australia. You're awesome. When I met Paul, he wanted to learn mixed martial arts. And so I, at first, tried to give him a little smattering of everything that entailed. Striking, grappling, kicking, boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, all this stuff. And when we got to the boxing part, he fell in love with the boxing. He was like, man, this is my thing. This is what I want to do. And all he wanted to do was boxing. So we would train together. We would do private lessons fairly often. And all he wanted to do was boxing. And I realized pretty early on my limitations as a boxing coach. And I also realized pretty early on Paul's potential as a boxer. And there was a disparity there. And Paul, he had a conversation with me. He said, you know what? I think I'm doing you a favor here. And I said, oh yeah, how's that? And he said, I'm helping you to become a better boxing coach. And I realized he was right. Yes, he totally was. He was taking a chance on me. And I'm very grateful that he did, because through all those hours of training with Paul in just boxing, nothing but boxing, oh man, I leveled up big time. As a boxing coach, as a boxer. But not just that, I was able to take what I learned there, expand upon it, and then integrate that into mixed martial arts, into Muay Thai, into Sanda, into kickboxing, into all the other ranges of combat that I coach. And as a result, I became a much, much better combat sports coach in general. Being a good coach means asking a lot of questions. It means questioning things. Not being dogmatic, but questioning things. There is so much dogma in martial arts, a great deal of it. I made a video recently about the turning back kick. And in this video, I pointed out what happens when you look over your shoulder and what happens when you don't, and how it's not actually necessary to look over your shoulder prior to throwing this kick. You totally can, and there's nothing wrong with that, unless you are looking all the way and not just with your peripheral vision, in which case you'll turn it into a spin instead of a turn, and you'll mess up your kick. You'll turn it into a sloppy hook kick instead of a straight back kick. But there was a fellow in the comments who wanted to fight with me over that, because he had been taught the dogma of the World Taekwondo Federation, which I was also taught. Because I spent many, many, many years pursuing a black belt in that style, 3rd degree. And what the World Taekwondo Federation teaches is look over the shoulder before you throw the back kick, right? And here I am telling the world that's actually not necessary. In fact, without looking at all, you can actually throw it better. Better. If that's throwing you off, don't do it. But this guy wanted to have an argument with me. Maybe some of you right now want to have an argument with me because that is how you have been indoctrinated. But what I'm asking you to do is try it out. Try it out for yourself. Exercise faith, my friends, by trying it out yourself to see what happens. What is the plant that grows when you plant that little seed? Fighting is an act of faith. I made a whole video about this. It's an older video. Not a lot of people watched it, but it's one of my favorites. So one thing that coaching has taught me is don't be dogmatic. Because that gets people hurt, that gets people killed. That holds you back, that holds them back. When you find good, true principles, okay, that's good. That doesn't mean there isn't something better, or a better way to do it. And that also means there isn't somebody out there who can't shut that good thing down in a hurry. That's happened many times, where I have fixated on a technique. A technique became a hobby to me. Oh, I love this technique. This technique is great. It's perfect. It works. Most of the time, it's a high percentage, low risk thing. And then you try that against a certain individual who just shuts it down, and you realize, yeah, that wasn't as good as I thought it was. We need to go back to the drawing board, because I don't want to send my fighters out there with a little pea shooter when their opponents have anti-tank guns on them. I don't want to send them with a knife to a gunfight, if you will. That's why I always say martial arts is a pursuit of the truth. It should be. If your martial art is not a pursuit of the truth, change that, my friends. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.